Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Kitchen time for things that go on in the kitchen, not orchids. You said you wanted to see me make some bread, so you might also see me make a fool of myself. I've read the book, as it says, please read instructions first. Well, unlike normal men, I have decided to read it. The bit that tickled me was, we understand you will be keen to get cracking with your new bread maker, but please contain that excitement. So I've contained the excitement. Tickled me, that did. I've had a look at what all the buttons do. There's been some preparation. I've had to wash this bit in warm soapy water, make sure it was thoroughly dry. Then I've had to oil the inside and then actually bake it for 10 minutes. That effectively seasons the metal. You do that with things like frying pans and stuff that have got non-stick surfaces, and then give that a wipe over. So that's all done. So in theory everything's ready. Essential bit of equipment is coffee, obviously. Now it's quite important this works because I'm actually out of bread. And this takes about 3 hours, so I'm not going to have bread ready for lunch, am I? Oh, I'll have to eat a crust. All that's left on my bought loaf is a crust. You get equipment with this. You get that, which is a measuring cup. So that is 1 imperial or metric cup. We'll use the proper thing. And then you get a tablespoon, a teaspoon, and a 1/4 of a teaspoon. So it gives you the relevant tools. And it recommends, with all the recipes in this book, you use the measuring cup and don't use weight, even though the recipes show the weight. It says use the measuring cup, so that way everything is consistent, and that way it doesn't matter whether that's imperial, metric, US, UK, it's a cup, and as long as all the ingredients are using that cup, it should work. So that's the bits and bobs. Instructions on how to turn it all on there. So I'm just going to have a go at a basic loaf. Let's not get flashy, which is basically for white and brown breads. Now I got 2 lots of flour. They didn't have the one I asked for, but they substituted it. So it's Tesco's very best, very strong white bread flour, not ordinary cake type flour. So strong white flour. And the make that I remember I used to use donkeys years ago when I used to make bread frequently. I have done this before, but not with one of these, just all manually. This is wholemeal, plain wholemeal flour. But I'm just going to stick to a white loaf today. I'm not going to try doing anything flash. The idea is actually to use half and half, because if you use all brown flour, wholemeal flour, you get a heavy loaf. White can be quite light and fluffy if you get it right. Get it wrong, it'll be soggy in the middle. But half and half gives you the benefit of both. You get the flavour of the wholemeal without it being too dense. But we'll stick to white today. Right, so that's the basic one. That's the basic program I'm using. Now what we've got to do is find a recipe to go with it. Using the right ingredients. It does mention that the fast action dried yeast is the best for the recipes and the bread maker. So recipes in this book with that's the best yeast. That was potluck. that's all they had. And I had to go to 3 different shops to get that. Nobody uses this anymore. It's dry skimmed milk. So milk powder. Everybody uses proper milk nowadays. And I can substitute fresh milk instead of that, but it would have to be part of the water measurement, because if you put it in addition, obviously you've got too much liquid, haven't you? You can use honey instead of sugar, but I'm going to stick to sugar this time. Salt, that's going to be a problem, isn't it? I don't have sprinkly salt. We've got a way around that. Slight detour. I've only got sea salt, which is granules, which is no good, because obviously it might work, you know, providing those granules actually dissolved in the mix as it's working, but it would be much better if it went in as sprinkly salt to start with, then it hasn't got to worry about getting enough liquid to turn into that type of salt. I got that, not for salt, I got that for herbs and things. Hardly ever gets used. Weighs a ton, that's granite. Absolutely weighs a ton. That's the trouble with kitchens, you end up with clutter. You end up with getting stuff that sounds like a really good idea, use it a couple of times and never use it again, and it just clutters up the place with all this stuff that you never use. Right, so we've got our salt, we've got oil, flour. I think that's everything. Right, let's go and find the recipe. Basic white bread, that's what we want. Let's stick to the easy stuff. Now this thing can do 3 different loaf sizes, a pound and a half and a 2 pound. But the programming on that only allows for basically a small loaf, which it considers to be a pound and a half, and a large loaf, which is the 2 pound loaf. But it says if you want to make a small loaf, a 1 pound loaf, use the small program and it will work. But I thought, well, let's cut our options and make a pound and a half, that way the program and the recipe match. Trying to minimise the things that can go wrong here, end up with a soggy mess. Right, you have to add the ingredients in the sequence it says in the recipe. So first of all, typical, we want, God, this writing's small, 3/4 of a cup of water. No, we're going to do the pound and a half. So that's, God, job to read that. 1 1/8, 270 mil. Has it got mil on here? Yeah, it has. Right, and this needs to be slightly warm. So if we use 1 cup first, so I've got to hold it over here. I know it's off camera, but I need to be able to see the measurements. These need to be right, too much liquid to get a soggy loaf. Right, that's 200 mil. Pour that in. We've now got a puddle in the bottom. How much do we need altogether? We need 270. So I now need 70 on there. Well, that's, if I put a drop of cold in there, because I don't want to put boiling water in a plastic cup, that wouldn't be the best of ideas. But this hasn't long boiled because I made my coffee, so this will give me my warm. This is supposed to be 70, isn't it? Oh, these are really difficult to read. Always the way. Right, if that's 50, that's 100. That looks like 70. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, yeah. So that's a little bit too much. Come down a bit. 70. There we go. Right, how warm is that? That's not bad. It's supposed to be a minimum of 21. Obviously to activate the yeast, but the room's warm. I mean, the room itself is sort of 23, 24, so room temperature would have probably been okay. Right, that's the water. Now we need 2.5 tablespoons of skimmed milk powder. Chair here. Torn. Right, what's it again? 2.5 tablespoons, that's the big end. Right, so, I'm going to need a knife, aren't I? What do I need a knife for? You get a heaped spoon and then level it off with a knife. Getting a heaped spoonful out of a bag is not that easy. And then just level it off just to make sure it is. Right, so that's 1. How many was I forgotten again? 2.5. If you do half then, that's going to be really accurate, isn't it? 2.5. Do half, I'm guessing. Right, so that was 2, and too much. Still too much, come out. Still too much, a bit too much. Yeah, that's about half. I doubt if that being absolutely spot on makes a huge amount of difference. In the big scheme of things, I'm starting to make a mess already. That rings a bell. Yeah, that reminds me of what I used to do, make a mess. And then want sunflower oil. Now, although it says these must be added in the sequence it says, I'm using tablespoons for oil, sugar and salt. Well, it would pay to put the dry ingredients in first before the oil goes in the tablespoon, wouldn't it? And then once the oil goes in there, it's finished with. So, right, sugar we want, surely that doesn't say 1/4. Let me just have a quick look at something. I wonder if is a teaspoon 1/4 of a tablespoon? You imagine it's got that sort of thing in here, isn't it? You know. Conversion charts. Oh, here we go. Oh, it does say there these are British standard spoons. So jolly good. It doesn't say how much is a teaspoon, 1/4 of a tablespoon. I don't know. Oh well, we'll just have to do what we can. Right, back to where we were. Sugar. And that is 2 1/4. So basically it's 2 and a bit, isn't it? One. Two. Too much. Not enough. That's a third. Make sure your ingredients are measured accurately. And then it says uses measurements like 1/4 of a tablespoon. If that's a teaspoon, which I will find out for next time, then that will make life a lot easier. Right, so that's the sugar's gone in. Make sure I remember what we've done. Right, 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt. That's 1/4 of a teaspoon, so that's good. And that's a lot of salt. I'm not going to have anywhere near enough, am I? We need more salt. Where did I put it? Over there. Quite a bit more actually, right? Seems an awful lot. So I suppose it's for a whole loaf, isn't it? It's not like my daily intake. It's about treble my daily intake, but it is for a whole loaf, isn't it? So. Right. 1 1/4. If you put too much salt in, you will kill the yeast. If you don't put enough sugar in, it won't work anyway. That's about right. That's the salt done. Now we can put the oil in, but that's the last ingredient before the flour. And the fast action yeast says a teaspoon. That's the point. What is in here? I bet this is in sachets or something, isn't it? It is. In sachets. What does it say a sachet contains then? Be nice if it was a teaspoon, wouldn't it? say, that's pretty poor, isn't it? It doesn't actually say how much is in a sachet. But yet another bread recipe. They're coming out your ear rolls, bread recipes, aren't they? One sachet is 7 grams, because the recipe they've got is by weight, not by volume. I suppose the easy way is to tip it out into the tablespoon, teaspoon. This has got to go in last anyway, so you know, I doubt if we'll want more than one, but we might do. Right, so where did we get to? We've done the salt, it's oil next, isn't it? And the oil is 2.5 tablespoons. 2.5, that's a lot. And that's going to float on top of the water, isn't it? Never mind. 2.5, right. 1. 2. And 1/2. Right, that's a bit too much actually, let's put a bit back. There we go. Because that's not that accurate, because some of that oil is going to stay in the teaspoon. Right, we can go in the sink now. Right, so that is all the dry ingredients, wet. We've got water, we've got the skimmed milk powder in, we've done the oil, we've done the sugar, we've done the salt. Next is the bread flour, and what we're looking at here is 3 cups of strong white bread flour. Right. We do start making a mess now. Here's me cup. I would imagine when I've done a couple of these, I'll just do it with my eyes shut, you know. But I'm being ultra careful this time, simply because it's all new. Right, 3 cupfuls, much of which will probably go on the floor. It says fluff it up, don't use it compacted. Don't tap it down and all that sort of stuff, otherwise you knock the air out of it and you end up with more than you need. 1. 2. Say 3, didn't it? Double check. I always think when I was on the buildings, I'd worked with a carpenter for a while, and his golden rule, he said that you can apply it to life. Measure twice, cut once. And that's what this is. You know, read it twice, do it once. And you won't get it wrong. Right, that's 3 fluffed up. With a nice pile in the middle, which I will now make a little well in to put the yeast in, so that it doesn't touch the liquid before we fire it all up. Right, yeast, and the yeast was 1 1/4 teaspoon, so we'll just have to see how much is in here, won't we? The teaspoon is luckily the dry end that hasn't had the oil in it. So I might end up using a bit of a sachet to actually get this. Right, let's see what this is then. Right, so that's 1. A sachet would be far too much looking at this. If that's 1, so we might end up wasting a bit, because I think once it's opened it probably won't keep. And I want 1/4 teaspoon. Oh, that's this little one, isn't it? Yay! Let's hold it over there, then if any misses at least it goes in the recipe. Right, well, that's only about half a sachet. Now I might be able to reseal that, get all the air out of it, and then I can tape that shut with some sellotape in a minute. Just put the scissors on top of it for the moment. Right, so those are all the ingredients. Double check. Water went in, Skim milk powder went in, sunflower oil, well it's not sunflower oil, it's olive oil. I don't have any other type of oil. I have that type of olive oil for cooking, and although I haven't got much left at the moment, I have that as posh. That's not so good for cooking because it's got a low boiling temperature, so it burns. Okay, so we put the oil in, we put the sugar in, we put the salt in, we've done the bread flour, and now we've done the yeast. Right, now we turn it all on. We've got to plop that in there, line it up, twist it until it locks, and put the lid down. That's the easy bit. Then we'll turn it on. Woo! Beepy noises. Right, what happens next then? Now we go to the how to work the bread maker rather than the recipe. It's the trouble, recipe books don't have to get in a mess. I've already got water on this. There's a tissue. The trouble is, to get the bread maker in, everything in the kitchen has had to be moved. You know, my toaster is now in a different place. Everything's in a different place, so the bread maker's got somewhere to be. Because obviously it doesn't live on top of the cooker. Right, so back to the how does the bread maker work? Press buttons and get beeps, I suspect. Right, there we go. Right, twist baking pan anti-clockwise until it locks. Alright, but done all that, put your ingredients in, put it back in, close the lid, that's where we are. Right, plug the bread maker in and turn it on. Yeah, we've done that. Right. Select desired program by pressing the menu button. And we're on program 1, aren't we? To do basic bread, it was program 1, I think. Basic bread, program 1. Right, so it's already on program 1, isn't it? I bet if I press the menu it will go to program 2. Yep. So we cycle round until we get back to 1. Right, program 1. Press the loaf size button. Where does that come up then? Yeah, that's. Oh, I see. It's little arrows. The writing's on the top, and there's a little arrow that goes along. So that's 1.5 pound loaf. So it's done that. Choose the desired crust colour by pressing the crust button. Now you can have light, medium, or dark. Should we have medium? Yeah, we'll have medium. Always aim for the middle, and if it goes wrong, it's still within range. If it's a bit light, it'll still be okay. If you press light and it's a bit light, it's got no colour at all, is it? So we've done the crust. If you wish to delay the start time, do that now. No, I don't. Press the start-stop button to start the machine. The bread maker will beep, the colon will flash, and the baking light will illuminate. We have contact. We have worry noises. Well, that's it. Now I'll just leave the camera running for you because you've got 2 hours 53 minutes to wait before the bread's done. That's a long time, isn't it? Right, so there we go. First loaf is underway. We will resume filming at the point of revelation, where we open the lid and get the thing out and find out it's a soggy mess and it hasn't worked. So I'll be back. Hi, welcome back. Well, the timer on this thing does actually count down, and it says 1 at the moment, so less than a minute to go. So hopefully that's come on. Ah, there we go. So that's it, it's done. Let's want to see what happens next. I hope that doesn't go on forever. Ah, there we go. Now apparently what it's done now is switch to keep warm mode, which it does for an hour. But obviously I'm not interested in using that. We want to get it out and have a look, don't we? I shall need glove things, don't I? Don't get to use these very often. Right, so Turn it off. Cloud of steam. No, not too bad. Well, it sort of looks like a loaf, I suppose. You're not going to see much because it's a small loaf. It's not going to come up to the top of the tin, is it? We've got to twist that to unlock it. It should lift out. Now this has got to be left to cool before you take it out, apparently. Oh, it's got quite a nice crust. I'll have to pick the camera up. And we'll come back later when it's cooled and have a look at getting it out of the tin and perhaps cutting a slice off to see what it looks like inside. But certainly looks like a loaf. Now, we chose the medium colour, didn't we? So depending on the sorry, I was look at the screen, not the floor. Depending on what the texture's like inside, that colour could change next time, because if this is a bit too moist inside, then obviously it needs a little bit less moisture, because although these recipes are pretty safe, it does say you might need to make minor adjustments to make allowances for the make, you know, and brand of flour and things like that. So we may have to make adjustments next time. And I mean, I could certainly have gone with the lighter colour for the crust. This is an ordinary, you know, sort of everyday loaf that in the main is probably going to get used for toast. So the colour of the crusts and the type of crust doesn't matter that much. However, like if Hannah was down for the weekend, we can now start having a tea that we used to have when the kids were young, which we used to call a picking tea, which is freshly baked bread, still slightly warm, and assorted cold meats and cheeses and salady bits, crisps, and you know, you take a piece of bread and help yourself to bits. You pick and make your tea up that way. Anyway, we'll come back in a bit and get it out the tin and take a slice off and see what it's like. Better not be like cake. Right, be back soon. Right. Well, if it's cool enough to do that, it's cool enough to take out. I presume. Just turn it upside down and give it a tap. Yay! Right. But the downside is that the blade that mixes it always ends up in the loaf and you have to take it out, which is best done when it's really cool. That must be a little bit of flour that didn't mix in the corner. So we'll take that off. And this now needs to cool on a wire rack, which I'll have to move the camera because it's in the corner of the room. Certainly end up using lots of bits and pieces, don't we? That's supposed to go on there. And it does say not to attempt to cut it until it's really cool. I've actually got a bread knife that will cut fresh warm bread, but we'll leave it a little bit longer. I must admit it looks a bit cakey, but that's the outside, and it's not crunchy, slightly soft, but a crust will often form later as it cools rather than when it's still hot. Anyway, I'll be back. Right, they say the proof of the pudding, that is very, very gently still warm. Certainly not a hard crust. But proof of the pudding, you take the crust off and see if we've got cake inside. That's not a bad texture, not bad. Still quite warm inside. As I said, most of the bread in this house with me gets used for toast. Occasionally I'll have a sandwich lunchtime, but a lot of that depends on how fresh the bread is. You know, even bread that's not very good will toast okay. Well, it seems okay. Now it's got to be, it's not going to keep long because it hasn't got all the preservatives and stuff that you get in store-bought bread. But it'll keep for quite a long, well, probably 2-3 days. If it's put in a plastic bag and the air's excluded, but it's got to be totally cold to do that. Otherwise there'll be condensation and then you get a soggy outside. But it cuts nicely. As I said, I prefer a crunchier crust, but I can look into how that can be achieved. Right, the actual test is, let's see what it's actually like to eat. As I say, it needs to be reasonably cold. If you put butter on bread that's too warm, it'll just melt and serve no purpose. So we'll have a bit of butter. I only have proper butter, I don't muck about with any spreads or anything. And this is strawberry jam, which I haven't had for ages, on the grounds that it's quite sweet. Probably I've been about 1 million calories on that slice of bread. Yeah, perhaps I should have taken a bite of the bread before I put the jam on to really taste what it's like. Well, it's very edible. Slightly chewy, but then I'm comparing with shop bought bread, which is all I've had now for the last blinking 20 years. I think we'll class that as a success, and see what it's like for toast in the morning. So we'll let it get stone cold, put it in a bag, shut the air out, and as I say, the main problem is that I can make a smaller loaf than that, you know, like a third smaller. So instead of 1.5 pounds, make a pound loaf, because there's only me, and I'll probably end up throwing some of that away because it will go stale before I can eat it all. I don't live off of bread. I always have toast first thing in the morning, and I either have some more toast or a sandwich at lunchtime, and that's my bread done for the day then. So it'll be difficult to use it up. And the whole house smells of fresh bread. It's worth doing it just for that, I think. Anyway, I class that as a success. So it works. It's fine. It'll really come into its own next time Hannah comes down, if and when that can ever happen. And yeah, this will make a change from a shop bought loaf. I can't see me doing this on a, you know, every couple of days, but it'll make a nice change. So good stuff. Pleased with that.